Hello everyone and welcome to The Green Flame, the Deep Green Resistance broadcast that brings you radical analysis, practical skills, and artistic expression from the revolutionary movement to defend the planet and rebuild just human communities. I am your host and comrade Max Wilbert.
And I am your co-host, Jennifer Mernan. On January 16th of this year, 2020, The Green Flame aired Bushfires and Disaster Capitalism in Australia. We felt deeply compelled to listen to the voices rising from those fires. It is truly haunting that as 2020 nears its end, Max and I found ourselves in the midst of record-breaking fires and drought in the summer of the Northern Hemisphere, and felt compelled to record this conversation on extreme weather in October. It is simple yet mind-boggling to report the numbers. Where I live, on the occupied lands of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho peoples, in the state of Colorado, the largest wildfire ever recorded, the Cameron Peak, has burned 326 square miles. The second largest fire, the Troublesome, has burned 303 square miles. It is November, and they are still not fully contained. According to an interim report conducted by the World Wildlife Fund, nearly 3 billion animals perished or were displaced during Australia's bushfire season of 2019 and 2020. From Mike Davis's September 16, 2020 article titled "California's Desert Ecosystems Will Never Recover," I quote, "Fire in the Anthropocene has become the physical equivalent of nuclear war. In the aftermath of Victoria's Black Saturday fires in early 2009, Australian scientists calculated that their released energy equaled 1,500 Hiroshima-size explosions. Even greater energy has produced the pyrocumulus plumes that for weeks have towered over Northern California and Oregon. Likewise, the toxic orange fogs that shrouded the Bay Area for weeks might be considered a miniature nuclear winter." End quote. We invite you, our listeners, the curious, to go beyond the numbers in this episode on extreme weather. Scientifically, how is global warming linked to extreme weather events, fires, hurricanes, floods? Politically, how does disaster capitalism exploit fire? Socially, what now? And emotionally, what inspires courage? We thank our sound editor, Iona, for weaving the January 16th episode, Bushfires and Disaster Capitalism in Australia, into this episode. We thank our sisters, Kim Hill, permaculture design instructor, and Joanna Pinkovich, environmental and women's rights activist, for sharing their insight, knowledge, and wisdom now as we did at the beginning of the year. We are so grateful for being permitted to share Tasmanian artist Denny's music. Thank you. Welcome to this episode of The Green Flame, Extreme Weather.
We put some numbers to what has been burned. So 14.5 million acres of forests, 500 million native animals have been killed. Surviving animals have been abandoning the young, so they're quite distressed. There is a big efforts happening to actually help animals as well. But yeah, this is serious. This is nothing like we've seen before.
I'd like to start with a quick question to land us in this moment. What is happening currently on the land you inhabit?
Yeah, I'm in the city of Wollongong on the south coast of New South Wales, and there are fires, none particularly close, but all around. And it's been smoky for over a month, and there's ash just raining down all the time. And yeah, it's just devastating. It's just realizing that ash, this is the ashes of all those who have died being scattered. So it's this constant funeral of, just the death raining down. And yeah, I felt like I've needed to connect directly with that. And I live right near the beach. So I've gone there and there's just charcoal washing up. I'm just thinking, wow, it's going all the way out to sea and washing up on the beach.
Hello, Max. I'm really happy to be joining with you and recording this episode of The Green Flame about extreme weather. And I thought the first thing that we might do is just talk about what extreme weather actually is and the range of events that it covers. Some are like extreme precipitation events, which we're familiar with, floods, big snowfalls, that kind of thing. And then there are ones that span time, that are droughts, which right now in the biological communities that we are engaged in the West, in the United States, is what's been happening over a series of years. There are extreme heat that we're encountering now, and then wildfires. Wildfires are the ones that are immediate, I think, for you and I both. Could you maybe go into a bit about how climate change is related to all of these events that are extreme weather?
Sure, Jennifer. Yeah, thanks. And it's good to be with you here. So I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a climate scientist, although I have studied some climate science at a basic level. And I took part in a climate science expedition, not as a scientist myself, but as a journalist documenting their work to the Russian Arctic in 2010. So the basic science of climate change all revolves around the greenhouse effect, and we've all heard that term. And in its natural form, the greenhouse effect is a really good thing. The world would be well below zero, below freezing average temperature without the greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse effect makes the Earth livable. And what the greenhouse effect essentially is that in the Earth's atmosphere, the gases that are trapped by gravity around the surface of the planet, we have, among many other gases, we have water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. These are the most important, what we call greenhouse gases. And what this means is that essentially radiation comes in from the sun. So sunlight comes in from the sun towards the Earth, radiates through space, and comes in through the Earth's atmosphere. And as it comes into the atmosphere, a little bit of it bounces off the planet and is reflected right back into space without warming the planet. And this happens especially, for example, in the Arctic regions where there's a lot of sea ice. So that's one reason why these areas are very cold. And this is what's called a feedback loop in the climate system. So when it's cold and there's a lot of ice, that ice is bright white and it reflects the sunlight back up into space, and that prevents that solar radiation from heating the planet in those regions, and it keeps that region cold. So this will come into effect later. Many people understand the positive feedback loops that we're seeing around global warming, where the melting of ice is causing global warming to speed up because it's reducing the reflectivity of the planet. So more of that incoming solar radiation, instead of bouncing off bright white ice, it's hitting darker ocean water or darker land that's been exposed by melting ice and warming up the planet more, causing more ice to melt, thus accelerating that process. So how the greenhouse effect works in general is that some of the light that comes in, like I said, bounces back into space, but much of it is absorbed into the Earth's surface and warms the Earth's surface and the atmosphere. And that radiation, that heat, then re-radiates out. But it radiates out at a different wavelength than it came in as. So the wavelength of sunlight is mostly visible light. It's in the visible spectrum. And the wavelength that radiates out of the Earth's surface and so on is mostly ultraviolet light. It's in a different wavelength. And that light radiates back towards space, and some of it escapes into space, but some of it is trapped by these greenhouse gases. And like I said, this is a very good thing in general. It keeps the planet habitable. But human activity, the activity of civilization, the cutting down of forests, the plowing of grasslands, the burning of fossil fuels, these things are releasing huge quantities of carbon dioxide, of methane, of nitrous oxide, and other trace greenhouse gases, and literally changing the chemical composition of the atmosphere. And this is disturbing a very precise balance that the planet has existed under for a very long time. And so what we're seeing is that more and more heat is being trapped, and that's causing overall global warming. So how does this relate to extreme weather? It relates to extreme weather because weather is driven by heat. So in general, the equator, the equatorial regions of the planet are hotter than the poles, right? Everyone knows this. If you're at the North Pole, it's likely to be cold. And if you're in the Sahara Desert or in the Amazon rainforest, it's likely to be warm, right? The weather system on the planet is based on that difference, the difference in heat, in energy coming in these different regions. So the process of weather is essentially a process of energy being distributed from the hot areas of the planet towards the cooler areas of the planet. And of course, because the planet is huge, because it's spinning, because we have seasonality, because of the tilt of the planet, and because it's a very complex system, weather gets very complicated, right? So we make a distinction between weather and climate. Climate is defined in the science as average weather, usually over a period of 30 years. So weather is what's happening day to day, year to year, and climate is the long-term trend, the long-term average. So not all extreme weather is caused by or associated with global warming. Extreme weather is really a normal thing throughout human existence on this planet. For as long as this planet has existed, there has been some extreme weather. But because of global warming, we are seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of some types of extreme weather, because global warming is putting more energy into the climate system, more heat into the climate system. And that heat is what drives weather, right? So we're seeing more heat waves, more drought, sometimes more extreme cold, paradoxically, stronger and more frequent hurricanes, floods, and some other types of events, as we have seen with what's happening in our areas right now. And Jennifer, do you want to get us started by talking a little bit about what's been going on in Colorado over the past couple months?
What's been happening in Colorado, in my experience, this year, two of the largest fires in the history of, Colorado, the region defined as Colorado by the civilized, have been happening. The largest one in the history of the state was just contained yesterday. And the other one, which is on the other side of Rocky Mountain National Park, is still there and still picking up steam. So that is what's happening currently in my long habitation of this land. And I've been here on the Front Range a total of about 50 of the 61 years of my life. I also experienced an extreme flooding event, an extreme precipitation event that they termed a 1,000-year flood, which was way outside of the normal parameters. The wildfires that are burning right now have a huge effect on wildlife and a huge effect psychologically on people. The clouds that we're seeing in the sky, and I don't know what it's like where you are, Max, but they're rusty red and the ash falls, and it reminds me of the interview that we did on the Green Flame with Kim and her experience of what was happening in Australia at the beginning of the year and the end of last year. So that's what I'm experiencing here. And what are you experiencing there?
Well, it's somewhat similar. We've seen pretty extreme wildfires here in Oregon, where I live, on occupied lands of the Kalapuya Nation. Pretty extreme wildfires this year. The science is actually not clear that the wildfires that we've seen this year have been exacerbated by global warming. In Oregon specifically, we have not had a particularly hot summer here this year, compared to recent years when we've had a lot of extreme heat. And actually a strong east wind, which is really what caused the wildfires in this area to explode. They were already burning for several weeks, some of them, before they really exploded into major conflagrations. These strong east winds, they're known to happen periodically. They're quite rare. The last time this happened, I believe, was in the 1970s. But it's not known, there's not a clear link between these strong east winds and global warming. There may even be a negative association, a small negative association with this. So where we can see a link with climate change is in California. California has been seeing all-time record temperatures over the past several weeks. Death Valley hit almost 130 degrees Fahrenheit for the first time ever. 129.9 was the official reading. Los Angeles set an all-time record, 121 degrees. And the heat and dryness in California has definitely become more severe because of global warming. And this has increased the likelihood of extreme fires there. One study looked at the last 40 years and found that fall temperatures in California have increased by 1 degree Celsius, and precipitation during the same period, rain, has dropped by almost a third. So that's doubled the number of days in the fall with extreme fire weather conditions since the early 1980s. So we are seeing a link between climate and fires in quite a number of ways. But here in Oregon, the link between these specific fires that we had this year and climate change are not that clear. And that's going to be the case with a lot of extreme weather events. A lot of people like to point at a certain extreme weather event and ask, did climate change cause this? And like I said earlier, extreme weather has always been a fact of human life. There have been large wildfires in this region for decades, for hundreds of years, for thousands of years. It's just a reality of life. Wildfires are part of nature, and they happen, and sometimes they're large and sometimes they're intense. And it's hard, it's very hard and sometimes impossible to link these events to global warming. But with some other events, it is much easier. Hurricanes, for example. Right now, we've had 5 simultaneous hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean. For the second time ever, the U.S. Hurricane Center has ran out of names. So they use an alphabetical naming system for each hurricane. So the first one might be named Avery, and the second one might be named Barbara, and so on, A, B, C, D, E. Except they exclude a few letters, so they use 21 letters in the alphabet. And so this is only the second time ever that they've ran out of letters. So we've seen 23 named storms, 1 subtropical storm, 14 tropical storms, and 8 hurricanes so far. This is only the second time that they've had to go into the Greek alphabet because they ran out of letters. So we are seeing a definite increase in strength of hurricanes. And this is predictable with climate change. We can expect this because the global warming is putting more heat energy into the ocean. It's putting more heat into the atmosphere. And that really is what drives strong, intense hurricanes, is warm ocean waters that really can increase the energy in these hurricanes. And we're seeing them slam into the southeastern United States and the Caribbean right now. I want to take a moment and invite you to a special event that's taking place on November 22nd. It's called Drawing the Line, Stopping the Murder of the Planet, and it's a special 4-hour live stream featuring Derek Jensen, Lierre Keith, Deep Green Resistance organizers from around the world, and special guests. The event begins at 1 p.m. Pacific time and is hosted by Deep Green Resistance. We will introduce you to on-the-ground organizing campaigns being waged around the planet, introduce various strategies for effective organizing, rebut false solutions through readings of the forthcoming book Bright Green Lies, How the Environmental Movement Lost Its Way and What We Can Do About It, and we will discuss the philosophy of resistance. There will be opportunities to ask questions and to participate in dialogue during the event. This event is also a fundraiser. The mainstream environmental movement is funded mainly by foundations which don't want foundational or revolutionary change. Radical organizations like Deep Green Resistance therefore rely on individual, small donations to support our activism around the world. We're trying to raise funds to support global community organizing via our chapters, fund mutual aid and direct action campaigns, and make our core outreach and organizational work possible. Whether or not you are in a financial position to donate, we hope you will join us on November 22nd for this event. For more details, please check out the Deep Green Resistance news service or our Facebook page. So Jennifer, there's been another extreme event that's been in the news lately, is this massive temperature swing that we saw in Colorado a week or so ago, where it went from below freezing, right?
The extreme drop in temperature has happened here before, and I learned a lot about that by being in relationship with the land that I'm on. There was a huge drop that happened, I think about 2 years ago, where it was a 60-degree drop, but it went below freezing. And that caused a big die-off, especially of non-indigenous tree populations, and had a huge effect on some of the trees that I've planted here. They barely made it back from that. This one, at least in the location that I was in, it was the same kind of degree drop, but it didn't go as low. And so I was anticipating seeing a lot of the plants die, and it didn't happen this time. It bounced back, and now we're experiencing, heat, where it feels, directly as if you're running a fever sometimes. It just doesn't feel right. Today it's about 90, and somewhere upper 80s, something like that. So that's my experience with those big temperature drops. And the plants and the biological community here is pretty resilient. At this high altitude, extreme temperature changes happen frequently, but it's happening with a regularity that's really threatening the lives of some beings here. So I just wanted to speak to that briefly. And then I think probably for me the most disturbing heat event has been the one in Siberia. That is pretty much mind-boggling what has happened there, and the temperature that was recorded in Siberia. It's supposed to be one of the coldest places in winter. That's what we always think about. But it reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's, I believe, 38 Celsius, right in that range. Wait a minute. Is that right?
Yeah.
Soared to 34.3 degrees Celsius. That's 93.7 Fahrenheit in Russia. In Olenek, is that how you say that? Ust-Olenek, Russia. So that's what's happening up there. And that is creating changes in the way that the atmosphere is flowing that affect us everywhere. Could you speak to that, Max? Do you know a little bit about how that affects like the atmospheric rivers and some of those natural systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So the warming in the Arctic is really extremely concerning. As you said, it hit over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 Celsius in northeastern Russia above the Arctic Circle. And that was on June 20th. The average high temperature in that area at that time of year is the upper 60s or around 20 degrees Celsius. So this was the hottest ever recorded temperature north of the Arctic Circle. And Siberia actually hit 100 degrees this year before Houston or Dallas, Texas did. So it's pretty shocking, pretty stunning. When I was in Russia in 2010, that was the hottest year in that region up to that point on record. We had temperatures into the 90s, and I was staying just a few miles south of the Arctic Circle, near a town called Chersky in northeastern Siberia, a very isolated, remote area. And we had temperatures in the 90s. The problem with this is, like I was saying earlier, this is part of a positive feedback cycle. In fact, several of them, because this entire region, not only Siberia, but most of the Arctic North and some other parts of the world that are very cold in the southern hemisphere and also in high elevation areas, are permafrost zones. And what that means is that the soil is permanently frozen all year round, permafrost, permanently frozen. And these soils, like your freezer, they tend to preserve whatever is in them. So these soils have a vast amount of wood debris and bark and old dead plants and all kinds of mosses and remains of animals and so on. A lot of organic biomass, organic material is frozen in these soils. And just like in a freezer, that freezing process stops the decomposition of this frozen material. And so with global warming, this permafrost is starting to thaw, and it's starting to release greenhouse gases. Because just like your freezer, if your power goes out, the food that's in there will start to rot. And that's exactly what's happening to this organic material in the permafrost. As it thaws out, bacteria start to get in there, and they start to eat that material, that organic material. And just like us, bacteria eat, and then they respire out carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. The difference is that the biomass of bacteria on this planet is so many orders of magnitude greater than human beings that the respiration of bacteria can have a measurable and massive impact on global climate at a global scale. And the bacteria that are in areas where there aren't oxygen, so the bacteria who are living at the bottom of lakes and ponds, who are living underneath the Arctic Ocean in different places like this where it's an anaerobic or oxygen deprived environment, they actually produce methane when they decompose this organic material. And methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so as the far north is warming, and as this permafrost is thawing out, we're seeing emissions of carbon dioxide and methane start to come out of that permafrost, start to bubble out of those lakes, start to bubble out of the Arctic Ocean itself, and be released to the atmosphere to make global warming even stronger. So these feedback loops are very dangerous. They're starting to pick up, and they have the potential to cause some major changes to the world's climate.
Because the people who have the power, the lobbyists, the developers and corporations that have the ear of the Prime Minister are actually quite likely saying, hey, just delay this for a bit, delay the response, because that we can benefit from this land being lost. We can then buy this land up cheap and open up for mining. So this is really happening. Like, some people are saying this is conspiracy theory, but no, this is happening. And it has happened. It happened after Hurricane Katrina. It happened after the Boxing Day tsunami. It happened after Typhoon Haiyan. And you were just saying yourself, Jennifer, you've seen it as well where you live.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty sure there's going to be. Yeah, this really scares me. There's I feel like the disaster is just starting now. The actual disaster after the fires is land being opened up for mining. I'll quote one of the things Naomi Wolf said in her video, and we can post a link to it in the show notes. She said, I know someone who is quite knowledgeable about disaster capitalism, and they said if there's land with endangered species on it, it can't be opened up for mining. But if you can exterminate those endangered species and make the land uninhabitable, you can change the zoning or the status of the land, and then it can be opened up for mining or other exploitation. So, yeah, that sounds like what's going to happen. And I feel like now a lot of plantation forests have burned, then the remaining intact forests are going to be targeted by loggers. There's a plan that's been in place for a couple of years already to build 8 new smart cities between Sydney and Melbourne, and plan for a growing population and build a high-speed rail link between them so people in those cities can commute to Sydney and Melbourne, even from 200 kilometres away. And they already have legal control of the land for those cities and that rail line to go, but I think they don't own it. So if they can arrange to get the land devalued, they could buy that up cheap. So I'm just saying, it's like, yeah, the coming disaster now of farmers getting driven off their land because they can't afford to rebuild, the land getting bought up, turned into cities and mines and probably fracking as well. Yeah, that really scares me, and I don't think people are talking about that. And that's something we really need to start mobilising and get a lot of people on that land and researching what developments are planned and getting some attempting to go through the legal system to defend the land. But yeah, I'm just seeing the disaster unfolding from now as a result of capitalism is going to be so much worse than the devastation caused by the fires.
That's horrifying. And why does it sound so familiar? I mean, it sounds like biotically cleansing, removing every other species and kind of agriculture, right?
Yeah.
And then you just grow humans and that's it. And this is like an extreme industrial version.
I think that one of the things that strikes me the most about the situation is that life creates balance, and there are harmonics going on between forests and the way that they sequester carbon and the way that soils are holding organic material. All of that has been removed. Civilization is plowed through biological communities' ability to create balance on the planet. And of course, there have been mass extinction events before that were caused by meteor hits or whatever it was, and it took a while for life to recover. But we, civilization, humans, have caused this one. And it's overwhelmed the capacity of life to create balance. Biological communities just aren't there anymore to do what they do naturally. Would you like to speak to that a little bit as well, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. And, whatever numbers it is you want to look at, whether it's the fact that, 98% of the old growth forest in the United States has been destroyed. That's the forest that has the most biomass and the most ability to sequester carbon. Whether it's the fact that, most of the Great Plains has been destroyed, not only here in the US, but in other grassland regions around the world, like Ukraine and parts of China, parts of the Sahel. These are the major agricultural regions of the planet now. And what was native grassland sequestering a massive amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases has now been converted into plantation-style agriculture largely. And this is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions and is making the problem even worse. So wherever you look, whether it's in the oceans where plankton populations are crashing due to the pollution of the oceans and the global warming and the ocean acidification that is affecting their ability to reproduce, or whether it is the high mountain regions where global warming is causing the melting of glaciers, which are critical to supplying cool, cold, fresh water to fish populations who live in the rivers and streams running off these mountain ranges, and to the human beings who depend on these rivers and streams as well. We are seeing the collapse of the biosphere in real time. And these processes that do change naturally over geological time are changing over time periods that are extremely fast due to the activity of industrial civilization. And I can just throw out a few more numbers to help people understand the scope of this. The last 5 years have been the hottest 5 years on record in over 120 years of temperature records. The top 10 hottest years ever recorded have all happened since 2005. And 2020, this year, is on track to potentially surpass 2016 as the hottest year ever recorded. And that's without a boost from El Nino. So 2016 was an El Nino year, and that's a natural cycle in ocean currents that causes certain years to be warmer than others. 2016 was an El Nino year, so it got a boost from that. It was hotter than it would have been because of that. 2020 is not an El Nino year and may surpass 2016. It will certainly be in the top 5 hottest years on record. Arctic sea ice is currently at its second lowest value in the satellite record, which is 42 years. It's at its second lowest level after experiencing a collapse in just the last couple weeks. So we are seeing pretty major changes in the climate system. And, I don't know about you, Jennifer, but there are a lot of people who look at climate change, look at extreme weather, look at the rate of the changes that are happening, and they get really depressed. I mean, this is depressing stuff. This is heavy material. We know that the future is going to be looking more dangerous. And, it's a rational response to feel fear, to feel upset, to feel sadness, to feel horror, to feel these very heavy emotions when you're confronting this reality. It's so important that we do confront that reality. And I also just want to say that, all the climate scientists that I've ever spoken to, and like I said, I was part of a climate science expedition. I've been to the AGU conference in San Francisco, which is the largest gathering of natural scientists in the world, and interviewed quite a variety of climate scientists, including some of the most prominent in the world. And all of them, without exception, said to me, it's not too late. It's not too late. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop fighting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Don't stop fighting to protect those natural habitats that do remain. Don't stop. It's not too late to stop fighting for and restoring those habitats which have been degraded or destroyed so far. It's not too late. And, so this can be a really heavy topic, but I just really want to emphasize for people that, any change that we can make right now, any reduction in greenhouse gas emissions is going to make the future less grim. Any natural habitats that we can protect will be a reserve of biodiversity, will be a potential climate corridor to help adaptation, help the natural world, non-humans and humans to be more resilient in the face of what is coming. So, I just want to throw that out there for people. I personally feel like I will not give up until every last living thing on this planet is dead. And that's something that, that I will stand by. And it's because I love this living world. And it's so important that we keep fighting no matter what.
Thank you, Max. And I'd like to offer some insights too from what I've observed. I can't help but realize the immensity, how immense what we are gifted by life is. As you strip away the biological communities, then you're faced with the raw elements. And one of the things that struck me is that, the fires are creating their own weather. Just the element of fire creating its own weather. And that kind of strikes me in a kind of poetic sense, that yes, you take away the mitigating forces of life and the balancing forces of life in this beautiful symphony of beings and what can be created, and you strip that away, and then you're faced with the raw elements. So what's the reaction that I want to have? The reaction is to put all of my belief, all of my effort, all of my energy, all of my courage, all of my fight into my fellow beings and into protecting and defending and loving the life that's around me, because I just got this massive lesson in what life is capable of. And I've also read a bunch about like mass extinctions that the planet has gone through before. I know that you can get through, and that you can, that life is part of getting through all of this. And much of the brilliance is in the smallest, in the smallest beings that are here. So I don't think that that's very scientific as an insight, but that's where I find my courage and my strength right now, is from life itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The life on this planet is so incredibly resilient and wants to live so badly. I'm always astounded at life's capacity to hang on, whether it is, growing out of the crack in the sidewalk, or whether it's in the Chernobyl irradiated zone where wildlife is flourishing despite some of the most toxic conditions on the planet, whether it is the salmon who are hanging on despite their streams having been dammed for 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, whether it is the trees who are losing their ability to reproduce in their home ranges, but human beings are helping them migrate northwards to adapt to global warming that's already taking place. The natural world wants to live and is incredibly adaptive to varying in natural conditions, which are often pretty extreme throughout the Earth's history. And the world can survive a great deal. All we have to do is get industrial civilization out of the way and maybe help a little bit in that adaptation process.
We've got this big climate movement going on at the moment that's saying, these climate disasters, there's a climate emergency. And I feel like that really feeds into the view that the climate itself is a threat and a danger and something that needs to be defeated and managed, which I think is the wrong way to go about it, because we've got all these Extinction Rebellion and climate protesters demanding that governments take control and take action, and corporations. And this is what's caused all this problem in the first place, is all the corporations. And there's like rallies planned for today around Australia demanding governments take more action. And it just feels really disempowering and wasting people's time, because they're all out trusting the governments will do the right thing. It feels almost religious to me, like saying, if we just pray enough, God will help us, or if we just march in the streets, the government will make it okay. And I just see that making it so much worse. And if all those people instead were actually out helping and being on the land and getting out of the city, seeing what's happened, helping affected communities, getting involved in defending the land, that would make so much more difference. It just seems to play into the whole disconnect of people and nature, the idea that we're separate to the climate and the fire, and like the climate and the fire itself are malevolent forces that we need to fight with. And then we get this whole climate action approach, which is we need more technology, we need more money, we need more infrastructure, and that's just gonna make it so much worse. So that was my thought on politically what we could be doing differently. It just seems like instead of trusting existing systems of power, we really need to do away with those altogether and put power back into local communities, and actually do away entirely with the whole system of business and capitalism and governments being there to exist to serve the interests of capital. Like, people are marching in the street believing that governments exist to serve the people, but that's not the case. We don't actually live in democracy, we live in capitalism, and governments exist to serve to serve capital, to serve the wealthy who can pay to influence them. So yeah, I think we really need to take a completely different approach to the way that we as people engage politically with the whole concept of climate and how we respond to disasters.
Skills to deal with grief, skills to connect deeply with your environment, even in your local area. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go too far from your own home even. Start looking at the landscape, start looking at the land rather, and build a greater understanding of what's happening, what's suffering, what's doing really well, and also dealing with grief, so we can not be stuck in action, which can be debilitating. And it is debilitating, and I see it spread quite widely. And we have to all find something empowering in that process, I think. Creatively. It is a creative process. Action is a creative process. So we have to find our own ways there, but also teach others. People have to feel the responsibility for that it's not extreme, it's not radical, it's just what you do.
I'm always sitting and thinking, is this life too quick? Too busy keeping up, I'm too scared to blink. It's never basic to build your love, build your life, or we're working to make it right. We're otherwise wise. We're otherwise wise. Ooh, we're otherwise wise. We're otherwise wise. Well, maybe I've been here before, and I'm taught to love like a sea to the shore. Maybe I've been hard to reach. I was searching.
This is Max Wilbert, one of the hosts of the Green Flame podcast. I want to thank you for listening to our show and let you know a few ways that you can support the Green Flame. First, you can subscribe to our platform using the podcasting system of your choice. We're listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pocket Cast, and all the rest. We're even on YouTube. Leaving us a positive review or rating on these platforms helps us reach a larger audience. You can also share these shows with your friends. If you're interested in donating to support the production of The Green Flame, please visit deepgreenresistance.org. And finally, the goal of this show is to activate people. So if you really want to support this show, start organizing in your own community. Thank you again for listening.